Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Melanie Zanona in Washington, and we begin with the latest escalation in the Middle East, with Israel and Iran trading fire for the first time in 2 months, threatening to drag the region into a wider war, even as the U.S. tries to negotiate an end to the conflict. Early this morning, air raid sirens blaring in Tel Aviv. After yesterday, Iran launched missiles at Israel in response to Israel's continued military offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. This video, released by Iranian state TV, showing the missile launches, though NBC News cannot verify the footage. Israel responded with strikes of their own, the IDF confirming it launched strikes throughout Iran, including on a petrochemical complex in southwest Iran. But there are now signs that Israel and Iran are willing to de-escalate, at least for now. In a post on social media early this morning, President Trump calling on Israel and Iran to immediately stop shooting. And then about an hour later, posting Israel and Iran are looking to do an immediate ceasefire. Iran's president also taking to social media, saying Tehran will not retreat in the face of any threat. And, quote, "We have neither abandoned the field nor the negotiating table." In a video statement, Prime Minister Netanyahu saying for now the fire has been contained, but similarly warning that if Israel is attacked, it will respond with force. All of this happening as President Trump continues to try to get a deal with Iran to end the war and end its nuclear program. Here's what he told Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker about those nuclear negotiations in their exclusive interview on Friday afternoon.
But, Mr. President, I'm curious because when you were campaigning, you said you would rip up the Iran nuclear deal, but negotiate a better deal. Why didn't you negotiate a better deal at the time? Because after it was ripped up, there weren't guardrails, and they escalated their production of enriched uranium.
Excuse me. It takes years to do these things. These people have been fighting for 47 years. They've been killing Americans. They've been taking off their legs and their arm, and their faces have been hurt so badly and so horribly. I'm moving very fast. I'm into 3 months. You know, Vietnam lasted 19 years. I'm into my 3rd month.
As for the concerns that Israel's operations against Hezbollah could derail any deal, President Trump telling the Financial Times, quote, "Netanyahu won't have any choice. I call the shots. I call all the shots." Joining me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is in Jerusalem. And with me here on set are NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube and NBC News military analyst and retired Colonel Steve Warren. Thank you all so much for joining us to break this down. Gabe, I want to start with you over at the White House. How worried is the White House about the latest escalation in the region, and could it derail the negotiations with Iran?
Well, Melanie, they're certainly on alert. You just saw that over the last 24 hours or so with President Trump on the phone with Prime Minister Netanyahu twice within that 24-hour period. You just also read his social media posts from overnight as well. But this is clearly not the first time that the president has been frustrated with Prime Minister Netanyahu and with the ongoing tensions between Israel and Iran. You recall it was just last year, nearly a year ago, actually, that he used an expletive to say that both sides didn't know what they were doing regarding another flare-up as well. So, yes, this is threatening to derail these ongoing peace negotiations. And I think that's why you saw the president get involved so much in these phone calls and urging Prime Minister Netanyahu to refrain from greater retaliation here so that the president can continue these peace negotiations. Mel.
Speaking of that phone call, what more do we know about the phone call between the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu? And are the two leaders actually on the same page when it comes to the end goal of this war?
Well, what we know is that the president did, urge Prime Minister Netanyahu not to retaliate. That's according to an Israeli official. And at this point, tensions seem to have calmed in the short term. But as we understand, the Prime Minister Netanyahu is reserving the right to retaliate if Iran attacks again. But it was interesting what we heard over the weekend on Friday, actually, in that exclusive interview with our colleague Kristen. She pressed the president on whether he was on the same page as Prime Minister Netanyahu. Of course, President Trump has tried to downplay any friction there, but he did say that they have disagreements. that, clearly we've seen before. But this all comes as really the goals of both administrations, Netanyahu in Israel and President Trump here in the U.S., seem to be diverging at this point. President Trump increasingly frustrated by how long this is going on for, and the potential for it to drag on and hurt political prospects here domestically. Although he denies he's not going to be pushed into any sort of an agreement here in the short term, he has repeatedly been trying to argue the point to his domestic audience that this conflict has not dragged on nearly as long as other conflicts that the U.S. has been involved with before, mentioning Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, and saying that he's only been at it for several months. But this does come as he's facing this growing political pressure here at home now.
And that interview with Kristen Welker and Trump, the president also appeared confident that the U.S. will ultimately secure Iran's so-called nuclear dust, as he likes to call it. But, Gabe, is it clear that Tehran is actually willing to give up its nuclear ambitions?
No, it's not at this point. The president and White House officials have been repeatedly saying that, yes, the Iranians have agreed in some way to scale back their nuclear program, perhaps if not forever, at least for a period of 15 to 20 years, that is part of the negotiations. But at this point, we don't have any indications. Nothing's been signed off on by the Iranians. And despite President Trump saying that the Americans would use their equipment to go in and take the so-called nuclear dust from Iran, there are certainly real questions about how that would work in practice. And then, there are just so many unanswered questions here, too, on whether Israel will continue in Lebanon, which the administration considers just a flare-up, but for the Iranians is a very existential, a crucial part of this ongoing conflict. So a lot of unanswered questions here, but the White House continues to maintain that these peace negotiations are still on track. And now that things have calmed down, at least in the last several hours in the Middle East, perhaps we could see some developments there, but many questions remain now.
A lot of questions remain. Gabe, I know you'll be on top of it for us. Thank you so much. I want to turn now to Richard, who's over in Jerusalem for us. Richard, what is the mood like in the region today? And what more can you tell us about the magnitude of these strikes?
So just to continue what you were talking about with Gabe, so both sides today appeared to pull back from the brink of a full-scale resumption of hostilities. We saw this statement from Iran, several statements from Iran, in fact, saying that their message had been delivered, that this round is over, that they considered their response appropriate to the ongoing Israeli war against Hezbollah in Lebanon. But they reserved the right to continue to fight and to continue to negotiate. And you were quoting Prime Minister Netanyahu. He gave an address to the people in Hebrew, and he said that Israel would respond if attacked again. But he also said that the war against Iran and against Hezbollah is not over. He said that Israel's never been stronger, they have never been weaker, and he will continue to fight them. And there have been renewed Israeli strikes just today in southern Lebanon against the city of Tyre in the south of the country. So it was not a calm day, but at least the major strikes, the ballistic missile strikes between Israel and Iran, the worst flare-up since April, that has paused, but it does not seem that the two sides have pulled back. They have acknowledged that this extended, that they acknowledged that President Trump intervened, but they're not over with the war, and they made that clear.
Well, to that exact point, are there concerns that this escalation could spiral into a wider, full-blown war?
I've spoken to a senior Arab official who's very concerned about that, someone who's directly involved with negotiations, is worried that Netanyahu's agenda is not finished, that Iran is not quite finished, that Iran is trying to reestablish its deterrence, reestablish or establish its control over the Strait of Hormuz. There's a lot of worry about the Yemenis. The Houthis fired a ballistic missile, according to the Israelis, at Israel today. Also in solidarity with Iran and in solidarity with Hezbollah. And there is the threat that the Houthis could close another vital waterway, the waterway leading from the Suez Canal through the Red Sea to the Bab el-Mandeb, where the Houthis are located. So there is a possibility for escalation. But I was just talking a short while ago to an Iranian expert, someone who's following these negotiations very closely. And when you do come to the brink of a disaster, there is also the possibility that all sides pull back a little bit when they realize how much there is to risk. So in the danger, there is an opportunity as well.
Richard Engel, thank you so much. Your reporting is, of course, invaluable to us. I want to bring the conversation here in the room with me. I have Courtney and the Colonel on set, but I still want to start with you, Courtney, about these strikes between Israel and Iran. Was the U.S. involved in any way?
So at this point, we have no indication that the U.S. military was involved in any of the strikes, so essentially partnering with the Israelis to strike inside of Iran. And we still don't have any confirmation that the U.S. was involved in any of the defensive piece. So Iran launched quite a few ballistic missiles, and we're still not even sure if there may have even been some other projectiles at Israel. The U.S. has historically, over the last year plus now, been, or more than that even, been helping Israel with their defenses. But again, at this point, we don't have any confirmation that the U.S. was involved in either the offensive or the defensive of this.
And Colonel, what do you make of how quickly things escalated? And do you think this will continue, especially if Israel does continue its operations in Lebanon?
It spiraled up very quickly, and keeping in mind that one of the reasons the Israelis struck into Beirut is, of course, because Hezbollah fired missiles into Israel just the other day. So, Hezbollah is part of the wild card here that we really don't know. They're the hardest ones to control, probably the least reasonable, the least willing to talk. So that's the biggest problem, I think. But it's absolutely something that we need to keep a close eye on. American forces, of course, remain ready to help the Israelis if needed.
And the Houthi rebels also claimed some responsibility for some of the strikes in Israel. What do you make of their involvement in this conflict, and could we see more?
Yet another wild card, right? Two big wild cards. And the Houthis, we don't know what they're going to do, and they're hard to talk to. We don't have a lot of information about them, but we do know that they retain capability. They have an offensive, a missile capability. They've closed the straits to Bab el-Mandeb in the past, and we know that they can do it again.
And Courtney, you had some really great reporting over the weekend about concerns in the Pentagon over Israel spying on the U.S. Talk to me about that reporting.
Yeah, so what we learned, and that's with our colleagues Gordon Lubold and Dan DeLuce, is that the Pentagon recently increased the counterterrorism threat level for Israel against the United States. So basically what that means is the Defense Intelligence Agency put out this assessment that said that they are concerned about the increase or the level of spying that Israel is doing on U.S. government officials in recent weeks. This is particularly during the period of the ceasefire when we're told that Israel was trying to figure out from government officials where the U.S. was on the possibility of some sort of a deal with Iran. So because of that, the level is now increased to its highest, and that is known as critical.
Colonel, is it unusual to see allies spy on each other? And do you see this as an escalation by Israel?
I don't see this as an escalation. I see this as, look, we share willingly massive amounts of intelligence with the Israelis and all of our allies. But at the same time, we don't share everything. And of course, in their own interest, they want to know everything. As Courtney said, they want to know what we're thinking regarding Iran. And that's what they're looking for. Listen, all of our allies spy on us, and P.S. we spy on all of our allies. So this is just part of the game.
Yeah, that's helpful context there. Courtney, I also want to ask you about the Pentagon saying today it disabled an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman today that they say was violating the U.S. naval blockade. What's the latest on that blockade?
They've now turned around 134 ships. They fired at a number and disabled a number of them as well. It continues. I mean, the blockade is on both sides, right? Because remember, the U.S. military is carrying out a blockade, and then the Iranians are as well. That is really what is leading to a lot of these escalations in the region, because the U.S. and the Iranians are just operating in very close proximity to one another. And we are now seeing on a near daily basis where one side or the other is just pushing a little closer to the other, seeing how far they can go. How close can the Iranians, the IRGC, fly their drones to U.S. ships or to commercial ships that are in the Strait of Hormuz? And it's leading to these escalations. Again, we're seeing them on a near daily basis. And I think that's what the overall theme of all of this, whether we're talking about the firing between Israel and Iran or these continued conflicts between the U.S. and the IRGC, is the possibility of one of these interactions leading to some sort of a catastrophic event that then restarts the major combat operations. I think that's why there's so much tension in the region and realistically here in D.C. About this continued back and forth.
And Colonel, where do you think this goes next?
Well, so two things. Just to close out on what Courtney said, the biggest risk now, miscalculation, right? That's always the big risk in these tense moments. Where is it going to go next? Hopefully, and hope's not the best course of action, but what we want to see happen is a diplomatic solution, right? That's what we want. Everybody, as we heard earlier, everybody got close to the brink. Now they've backed off a little bit. Everyone's taking a breather, taking a breath. Let's let the diplomats talk and see if we can't get to peace.
Courtney, what are your thoughts on where this goes next?
I mean, still don't understand exactly what this peace negotiation even looks like, frankly. So, but the president and those around him say that they are continuing these efforts with some sort of a negotiated peace here. As long as Lebanon and Hezbollah are a part of that, that's going to be a difficult deal to make, because at this point, Prime Minister Netanyahu says that he is stopping with the firing back and forth with Iran, but he maintains what he calls the right of self-defense. So if Hezbollah fires into Israel, he is clearly going to fire back. And that's one of the big wild cards here. We talk so much about the Strait of Hormuz and the nuclear program, all of these difficult issues that they have to resolve. But as long as Israel and Hezbollah continue to trade fire, it's going to be difficult to get any kind of a lasting peace agreement here.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like we're any closer to a deal, but who knows? Colonel, Courtney, thank you so much for joining us.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.